So slowly, this is taking shape, but of course it's still not beautiful, and especially the layout here is not great. So therefore, that is what I want to work on next. And as a first step, it would be nice to position the elements inside of this input box in a different way. The text input, for example, should be centered in the middle, and whilst we could have the buttons beneath each other like this, I want to have them sit next to each other in one row, because they don't need to be that wide. They don't need that much horizontal space. Hence, it's time to go back to the code, and of course, just as a side note, as always, feel free to pause the video and try implementing this on your own. You will need to work with Flexbox, and you learned the fundamentals about Flexbox already, so definitely feel free to enhance the layout on your own before following along with me, where we will then enhance it together. Now, here is what I will do though. In Start Game Screen, we have this view which holds this entire input area, and this view has this input container style object attached to it. So inside this input container style definition here, I want to control how the elements in there are laid out. And since I want to center this text input, we have to add some flex properties that will take care about centering. And the positioning of elements in a flexbox is controlled by using justify content and align items. Now, justify content will position elements along the main axis, which by default is top to bottom, because the default flex direction with React Native is column. And align items will position items along the cross axis, which is the opposite of the main axis. So at the moment, as I just said, the default is flex direction column. So justify content will position items along this top to bottom axis. And therefore here, it doesn't matter too much what we set here. We could set this to center and temporarily remove align items. And it wouldn't really have any effect, because the main axis top to bottom is occupied by the elements already. And since this overall container is not higher than the space taken up by the elements inside of it, there is no extra vertical space to distribute. That's why this doesn't matter too much. Now what does matter though is align items, which positions item along the cross axis. And the cross axis in this case is left to right, because the main axis is top to bottom. And here we want to center the elements so that the text input element is centered. And this can be achieved by setting this to center. If we do this, indeed this is centered, and automatically as a side effect, the buttons got smaller. Because before, the default was stretch, which ensured that the elements would stretch out to take the full available width. The text input element doesn't stretch because we set a dedicated width on it. So we restricted the width of that element and didn't allow it to stretch. Now if we change this to center, we also don't stretch the buttons anymore, which is why they only take the space they need to fit the text inside of them. Now that is okay for the moment, because I don't want to position the buttons like this anyways. Instead, as I said before, I personally would prefer them to sit in a row next to each other. Now for this to happen, we need to encapsulate these two buttons into a separate container. As long as they are directly in the same container as text input, there is no way of positioning them in a different way. But we can wrap them in an extra view, and now it's this view which is in the same container as the text input, but the buttons are in a separate container. If we save this, this has no immediate effect other than the button sizes changing again, because they are now in a new Flexbox container, because every view constructs a new Flexbox container. That is something you must know, and therefore they stretch again. We would have to change the styling of that view to, for example, center them again to get rid of the stretching if we wanted to. Now I don't want to get rid of the stretching, but I do want to change the flex direction to row so that the buttons are next to each other instead of beneath each other. And for this, I'll add a new styling property here in my style sheet, which I'll name buttons container. Of course, this name is up to you as well, but here I'll set the flex direction to row, because now the buttons should sit in a row. And if we do that, and we add this to this view here, we add styles.buttons container as a style to this view, then indeed they are next to each other. Of course, the buttons now have different sizes again, and an easy way of fixing that is to again encapsulate every button into a new view, but now every button receives its own view. And the idea behind this is that now we have new Flexbox containers where every Flexbox container contains one button, and this Flexbox container here will again have a flex direction of column, and the button will stretch in there. And the two Flexbox containers we have here can now distribute the available space provided by this view, which is the overall container for these buttons. Now, just by adding these views, nothing changes though, because by default, a view takes only as much space as is needed by its content. But you also know what you can do about that. You can add flex1 to enforce that a view takes as much space as available. For this, we can add another style object, the button container, which only holds one button, and add flex1 to it. And this style object can now be assigned to these two views here. So here we add styles button container like this, and we do the same on this second view. And with that, these two buttons now have the same size and they distribute the available space amongst each other. And I'm showing this to you so that we A, have a layout that we like, but also B, so that we learn more about React Native and how we can create layouts. And indeed, it is super common and normal that you nest views into each other and that you combine different Flexbox properties on different view levels to achieve the final layout you want. And here I would say this layout doesn't look too bad for this input container. Later, we will make sure that the buttons don't look equal, but for a start, this doesn't look too bad. Now I would say it's time to work on the background before we then finally start adding more logic to this game.